Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest.
A very big welcome to the show to Topaz Adizes. Topaz is a visionary filmmaker whose work has graced festivals like Cannes and Sundance. In 2015, he produced the Emmy-winning interactive documentary, The And, which went viral and touched over 150 million lives. As the founder and executive director of The Skin Deep, he creates groundbreaking projects and explores and illustrates human relationships. He's been exploring the transformative power of deep human connection for over 10 years. And in his podcast, Getting Under the Skin, Topaz takes you behind the curtains on relationships as a way of unlocking the power of deeper connection and more fulfilling relationships. So join us as we dive into the transformative power of deeper human connection with our amazing guest, Topaz Adizes. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Nia. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your very interesting career and where did this interest in relationships come from?
I mean, for the last 11 years now, I've been holding the space for people to sit together and I give them questions and they have conversations, cathartic conversations. So I've been privileged to be able to witness over 1,200 conversations of all kinds of relationships, best friends, ex-lovers, parents with their children, grandparents, coworkers, husband and wife, partners. And I've learned a lot because it's a privileged position to actually sit there and watch these intimate conversations, because how often do you really get to see people have really vulnerable conversations? And we've been able to, with my team and I, The Skin Deep, to create this space where we've been doing that for the last 11 years. And we've learned a lot from that. And we've learned a lot about how do you hold a space for cathartic conversations? How do you construct the questions for them? And ultimately, I've seen from the response of all the participants who've participated in these conversations, as well as obviously people watching the videos, the impact you have how it changes your relationship to each other, but more importantly, your relationship to life itself, your experience of living when you do engage in these types of conversations.
How do you get people into these conversations to start with?
I mean, well, in the book I have that's out now called 12 Questions for Love, which is a guide to intimate conversations and deeper relationships, I outline the two big pieces, which is A, how do you create the space, and how do you construct the questions? There is a lot to be said about the questions. And I think often enough, we don't pay attention to the questions that we ask. We adopt questions that are given to us by society, by the industry, by our family or parents or friends, community group, and we race ahead looking for answers. And I think that's a missed opportunity because oftentimes you might get the right answer to the wrong question. And I think the more often we investigate the questions we're asking, we'll come out with more empowering, more constructive questions. And that's definitely true in the workspace.
So I guess when you're having these, I suppose they are challenging conversations, they are deep conversations, and you've really got to think about what we're talking about and how you're having these conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, well, there's two things, right? There's a space, and which is actually your question before is how do I bring people in the space? Is that, look, if you, we don't sleep in the kitchen and we don't cook in the bedroom. We do certain things in certain places. So in the workplace, when you have a meeting, what kind of meeting is it? Is this a brainstorming meeting? Is this a execution meeting is this a debrief of a previous action to see what the KPIs are, what the results are, what the learnings are? Or is this a brainstorming meeting so that we're strategic, that we're accumulating ideas for a strategic decision that we'll either make in this meeting or in the next? Communicating what the space is important because then it gives permission and expectations of how it is for you to behave. And that's what I mean by you don't sleep in the kitchen and you don't cook in the bedroom. So in the workspace, what kind of meeting is this? I find that in our team, we've always been clear about what kind of meeting is this. Or if it's not clear, then the team member will ask, wait, what kind of meeting is this? Am I here to give feedback and ideas, right? Or am I here to help execute a strategic decision or to outline what are we going to implement? I think that's important because otherwise you have different expectations across the team members, right? Obviously, there's always that team member who's, wait, why are we having this meeting and we don't decide anything? And the other person is like, well, actually, because this meeting is for brainstorming and it's not for decision making. Or the other one is, this is a decision-making meeting. Why are you talking about new ideas? So I think it's very important to outline the space that we're in, and we can discuss, we can double click on that. How do you do that? How do you construct the space? And then once you're in that space, what are the questions that you construct that you inject into that? And the payoff is a greater understanding between the people in your life. And it doesn't have to be intimate, right? And I think we spend more of our time at work than we do with our lovers, with our partners, with our family members, or as much. We spend a lot of time at work. And I think a big part of success, especially in the world now where a lot of AI is going to be executing cognitive function, question is, where's the magic between us? Where's the collaboration possible so that we can create better things?
That's interesting. We rely very heavily on agendas to tell us what the meeting is about. But if you haven't got a well-constructed agenda, or maybe even a meeting that doesn't have an agenda, and if somebody hasn't asked that question, how would you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I have a slightly, so there's an agenda in the term that you use, which to me means in a meeting, we generally use agendas where we're going to talk about this, then we're talking about this, then we're talking about this, then we're talking about this. So it's a roadmap. This is the trail that we will walk on. This is the spots we will stop along. These are the subjects we'll discuss. But it's not telling you how we're approaching those subjects, right? And I think that's a mistake, right? You could have an agenda, according to the use that you have, which is, we're going to talk about our quarterly report, and then we're going to discuss the new product launch, and then we're going to discuss what we're doing to solve this problem because we're losing market share. Okay, for instance. Well, those three conversations can be three different kind of conversations. So are you articulating, okay, in the first part, we're just reviewing the KPIs and seeing how we did. In the second part, if we have to make a strategic decision or come up with a solution to a problem, we're discussing first what the problem is and then what the possible solutions may be, and maybe we have to brainstorm around them. The environment has to change, and are we articulating that either in the same meeting or you create the space in a different meeting? In the scope of a conversation, what I like to make a distinction between is the intention versus an agenda.
The listeners and watchers, if you're going to consider that, ask yourselves that question when you go into a meeting. Is everybody clear about the purpose, what you're all there for? And if not, what might you want to do about that?
Because you might have an agenda where we're talking about A, B, C, and D. But what's not clear is how are we speaking about A? Are we brainstorming about A? Are we analyzing A? Are we collaborating about a solution around A? Are we just discussing about the implementation of the solution to solve problem A? What is our viewpoint by which we're having the conversation that's listed on that agenda point? Definitely. And it requires a different behavior. And that's what I mean, is that we have to create the space so that we're clear what is the behavior that's expected of us. Because if it's not, then that leads to confusion and loss of energy and loss of enthusiasm and loss of coherence across a team.
You've mentioned behavior a couple of times there, and I'm really interested in how we behave. And my fundamental belief is that self-awareness underpins our behavior, that we either make choices about how we behave, or we don't care about how we behave, or we don't know we can make choices about how we behave. So what are your thoughts on self-awareness and how it underpins behavior, which therefore underpins relationships?
That's a great question. So you're saying that self-awareness, or the level of it, or the lack thereof of it, dictates behavior?
Yes.
Interesting. That's interesting. What comes up for me is, what if we substitute self-awareness for the questions you ask yourself? Because if you're self-aware, you're asking yourself a different question than if you're not.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So if you're in a meeting and you're self-aware, you may be asking yourself, how is my behavior, how is my reaction, how is my contribution to this conversation affecting the others, affecting the collective journey of the team to endeavor to find a solution or to succeed? If you're self-aware, you most likely are asking different questions than if someone who is not. And then it's not a binary switch, right? Self-awareness is like a peeling onion. I mean, some are more than others, and there's different aspects of self-awareness. So for me, I like to ask, what is the question we're asking ourselves? What is the question you're asking yourself when you're in that meeting? And be very cognizant that the brain, your head, your mind, the brain, is built to get you answers. It's like a faithful dog that chases any stick you throw, regardless where you throw it. So if you throw the stick into the mud, the dog will run into the mud and get it and come out. So if you ask yourself, why am I failing at work? Or why did I not succeed with this project at work? You will get a whole list of reasons why you did not succeed at work. The dog is faithful. The mind is faithful. It will fetch the stick. It will find you the answers. But instead, you do have the control over where you throw the stick in the form of the question you ask yourself. So instead, if you ask yourself, what's the lesson in this failure that I could take to the next project? That already puts you in a more empowering position because you're seeing the failure as a lesson. You're taking that and you're going to bring that to the next, project that you have at hand, or the next endeavor you're facing. And so for me, self-awareness comes really imperative as to what's the questions we're asking ourselves. You go into a meeting where you know it's going to be problematic. There's a high level of conflict. You've been sitting through it, whether it's with your direct report, with your manager, or with whoever it is, or your colleague on the same level, and you know there's going to be conflict because things are not working out, and you have to have that conversation, and you're wondering, oh shoot, why do I have to do this today? Or, oh shoot, I have to do this today. Or, oh my, I hope this doesn't go too bad, right? You can change the question and go, okay, where is the positive result that can come out of this? How can this conflict make my relationship with this person better so that we can be more successful together? So when you go into this moment, if you ask yourself a different question, you will be looking for those answers, right? And I think that's really powerful, is shifting. Your question shifts your perspective, which then shifts the way you can perceive a situation and how you can best utilize it. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I love the way you put that. It's the questions we ask ourselves. And it reminds me of the phrase, be careful what you say because you are listening. That's exactly that mindset shift, isn't it? It's about looking at it from a different angle.
But see, most of us think we're listening to the answers. And what we're not listening to is the question. So you wake up in the morning and go, oh shoot, I have to do that today. You don't realize that you are actually answering a question. Oh shoot, I have to do that today is an answer to the question of what do I have to do today? Or what instead, if you know you have a horrible day, you're looking at your schedule and you got back-to-back meetings all the way through and it's going to be a challenging day. And your response is, oh my, I got to do that today. Okay. Oh geez, this is going to be a tough one. You're asking, well, how's the day looking? It's going to be a tough one. Okay. How about if you shift the question in that moment and you say, in today's challenging day, what's the lesson I can take out of it? Or what's a moment that I can cherish? How can I amplify these challenges so that I create a better team throughout this tension?
I love that. That's
right?
Brilliant. Yeah, so, definitely.
And then as a team, we should ask ourselves questions too. And I think we have about 15 physical decks now, 14 physical decks and another 5 digital edition decks. And 2 of them are for business. One is team building and one is coworkers.
Tell us what a deck is. So for listeners who don't know what a deck is.
Yeah. So basically, if you're wondering why am we listening to this guy who, albeit has a cool name named Topaz, what is that about? No, my parents are not hippies. But yes, my brothers are named Sapphire and Onyx, and my grandmother's named Diamond, so that's why I have a stone name. And my father's actually in organizational change. He has his own methodology about organizational cultural change. And I was steeped in that. I was raised in that. And along the way, as becoming a filmmaker, I then just started doing this project where I just brought people together and asked them questions, having asked questions of each other. And I've seen the power of asking questions. And that's where my experience comes from. It comes from 11 years of watching people have cathartic conversations, steeped in, being raised in my father's views of organizational change. And when I see that, that's where all my information comes from. And from doing all these 1,200 conversations, we have pulled out and distilled 2 editions, what we call decks, of questions, 200 questions that you can apply to different kinds of relationships. So whether it's friends or family or couples or strangers, or even the self deck where you can ask questions of yourself, as well as the coworkers deck where you can play with your coworkers or you can play with your team. We have a team building deck. And in the coworkers deck, one of my favorite questions is, what's a value we do not share with our clients, right? Why is that a favorite question? Because it takes pause. It's not something that you think about often. Another one is, how do you want to describe what we do to your grandchildren?
Okay, that's a big question.
changes the question.
Yeah.
You have the classic questions of, what should we be doing that we are not? What are we not doing that we should? Those are nice, simple questions. You've heard that often. That's not something unique and new, right? But, or at least for me, I like to ask things that are much more, illuminate the connection between the team members so that we can elucidate those hidden gaps. And it's in those hidden gaps where the magic exists, especially in the workplace, because we have complementary skills. You do one thing, I do not one thing. We have different experiences, and all that can bring disjointedness to a team because we come from different worlds. We have different experiences, but yet in the disjointedness, that's where the magic exists, right? It's in the difference of views where we're like, oh, wait, over there's a little overlap of an opinion, and we see a possibility there, and we know that can work. Let's execute on that.
I have a team meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. I wonder if I can get your questions deck before then. That sounds like a really important and an opportunity that you don't often get, to be able to have a space and an environment that facilitates those kind of questions and that thinking.
And also what helps here is the power dynamic, right? You're in a meeting. Who's asking the questions? Generally, it's whoever's the superior in the group or whoever's facilitating the group. But if you pull out a box of questions and the questions are there and they're random and you pull one out, the power is now more equal because the one who's dictating the question is not the manager or the executive or it's the box. It's random. And that creates a bit more of an space of equanimity, which is helpful because it creates a more space of an invitation for people to step in.
Yeah, and gives people an opportunity to speak up.
Absolutely. But without the people feeling as though it's a hidden agenda by whoever's running the meeting, right? Oftentimes, the person running the meeting, they ask a question, and that question is meant to prime everyone in a certain direction, which is fine, which is great. But if you actually are trying to create the space to bring people out, it's much more useful when the question is clearly coming out from a neutral source, right? From a box of card games, box of questions.
You mentioned that you've actually got a self edition as well. Tell us a bit more about the self edition.
So, the self edition is 200 questions to ask yourself. Now, why is that interesting? So, what I've come across, and for me has landed through experience of watching people and communication with people, is that when you're faced with a really challenging problem and you're banging your head against the wall for the answer, my suggestion is ask a different question, ask a better question. Because when we ask really good questions, the answer becomes obvious. So let me take a very simple example that works. I think many people can relate to. It's, should I break up with this person? I know this is more of a workplace podcast, but I think, should I break up with this person? This is just going to elucidate this example. Is that could be a really hard question to ask. What I say is skip that question and create a better question. And there's 3 parts to the question. There's time frame, how it makes you feel, and how it makes others feel. And so I say, okay, come up with 20 versions of that question. What can I do in the next 3 months? What can I do next year? What can I do in the next 5 years or the next chapter of my life so that I feel inspired, so that I feel challenged, so that I feel safe, so that I feel at ease, okay, so that I can, affect other people? Inspire my family, support my community, help my workplace. Okay. So you come up 20 questions with that. And then choose one that inspires you. So in the case of, should I break up with this person? You come up with 15, 20 questions. And maybe the question you solidify on is, what can I do for the next year that makes me feel most inspired and challenged such that I can contribute and build a loving family? When you ask that question, what should you break up with this person or not becomes obvious and clear. See?
It feels like a lot of the questions that you're asking are almost coaching kind of questions. And especially in your self deck, it's like a coach in a deck. Is that how you see it? Is that how you sense it? Is that one of your missions that helps people to move forward?
I have a purpose, which is to create space for people to explore. And in that space to explore, I have seen that there's an incredible transformative power of human connection. That sense of human connection, I call humanity. It's like this sense of humanity. And what I believe is that I don't believe humanity is in us. I believe it's between us. It's between us. And frankly, I don't even know if I like humans. Because sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes humans can be real pricks and selfish and power hungry and doing things for themselves while it does abuse to others. Who knows? I'm still looking at that, right? Yeah. But I love humanity. And what is humanity? It's what that connection between us when we're both elevating ourselves and doing something that's greater than either of us could do alone. And that's something that definitely happens in business, in the workplace, in any team. We're a team because we can't do this alone. So the question is, how do we cultivate the space between us? How do we cultivate the humanity, right? And that's how I see the card games, is opportunities to cultivate the space between. And that's why the product is called The And. All these editions, if you look at it, it's called The And, which are by far the worst words you could use on Amazon because it's The And. I mean, they're just two conjunctions. Like, they're not really helpful for SEO, but the and speaks to the space between, because a relationship is not you or I, us. It's you and I, us and them. It's the and that connects us. It's the and that illuminates the space between. It's the and where the connection exists. And so that's why we call the product The And, or the experience The And. And so for me, that's what it is. How do we cultivate humanity? How do we cultivate that sense of connection so that we can create more beautiful things, whatever that is.
So pleased to hear you talking about that gap between us. Something that came up in my research, I became interested in complex adaptive systems, which is organizations that are functioning less as hierarchies, but as people who have the necessary skills to be able to manage this project, and then the leadership moves to somebody else who has a different skill. And what adaptive leadership talks about is actually it's the spaces between people are more important than the individuals themselves. And that's exactly what you're saying, is that we are bigger than individuals. When you put teams together, we are greater than the sum of the parts. And it's brilliant to hear that.
I believe that. But then the question is, how do you do it? Because people talk about it in theory, but then the question is, how do we actually do that? And my experience is you create the space. And that means, what does that mean? That means you create the boundaries, and you create the intention versus the agenda, and you create a safe space, albeit an uncomfortable space. So we don't confound safety with comfort. They're two separate things. We aim for safety, yet uncomfortable. And then the second part is we construct really good questions, well-constructed questions. And if we do those two things, then you can cultivate the space between, and then you can tap into incredible amount of energy and magic is not the right word in the place of the workplace. Opportunities that are not seen without you accessing them. And then when you do access them, you have incredible opportunities to grow and to achieve your results.
You facilitate something called the Grace Experience, which you describe as an immersive retreat experience. Tell us a bit more about that, because interestingly, I think you're probably the third podcast guest that I've been talking to about retreats. So there is obviously something about changing your environment, changing your space.
Oh, absolutely. So, in my first 15 years of professional work, I was a film director. I would create films, which is basically creating a space and then filming it with the camera, then editing it again. So you live it once with your actors or your or real people, and then create a world. You capture something in that with the camera. Then you go into the post-production world, and then you recreate that world and recreate that story into another form of living, because you're editing it and you're putting music to it. And so I did that for 15 plus years. And I really understand the idea of space and structure in terms of a story structure. And so for me, I decided, and I need to stop here, because a film director doesn't do immersive retreats. A film director does not do card games or interactive experiences. And so when I realized that I'm not a film director, I created another name for myself, Storybreaker in this case. That gave me permission to only do these different things, right? And the take home now for the listener is, be really aware of what you call yourself. If you call yourself just a film director, that means you're going to wear your scarf and you're going to go to festivals and you're going to film things and you're going to be a film director. But if you break that mold by giving yourself another name that's more expansive, it gives you more nuance in the possibilities that exist for you in terms of what you can create, but how you can be in that space, right? So if you are a HR director, I'm not saying you have to tell this to other people because that could be confusing, but give yourself another name. Maybe I'm a treasure hunter what does that mean? Well, I find the hidden treasure in people and I amplify it. That would give you a different perspective in terms of what your job is. Just a suggestion. There's a power in what we name ourselves.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I call myself a story breaker, and the reason I call that was I realized we all tell ourselves stories. And then something happens that breaks your story. You fall in love, you get divorced, you get cancer, you get hit by a car, you heal from cancer. Something happens that changes your story and you have to create a new one. And I realized, you know what? I'm going to create opportunities for people to create new stories for themselves. And the story break that gave me permission to explore different fields and different creations. And one of those was Grace, which was an immersive retreat. And the beauty there was I took my filmmaking skills and the idea of structure and space and lighting and was able to create an immersive experience where 18 people would come together and share the stories of their lives. And the fundamental tenet was that the story of your life can be medicine for me, and the story of my life can be medicine for you. Because because life itself is a wonderful technology. And it gives you experiences, albeit painful or not, that can uniquely offer you a gift. And the question is, are you sharing that gift with others? See, there's a saying by Viscott, what's it? It's in the book, right? I forget. It's George Viscott. He wrote a book, went around it. He's apparently the first one to say it, but the idea is that the purpose of life is to find your gift, but the meaning of life is to give it away.
It really made me think about how we communicate. And a lot of what you've said, I can see how my thoughts about self-awareness, because I have this idea that self-awareness is a journey and you renew and you change depending on what's happening in your life. And a lot of what you're saying is that actually we have choices and we can change and we can reframe how we think about things, which really opens up the world to us. Brilliant. You mentioned technology there, and I'm going to take that a step further and ask you what you think about this move towards digitalism. And I'm developing an idea that as we move towards ultra-digitalism, we're going to need hyperhumanism. And you mentioned humanism right at the beginning. And I'm interested to know what you think about relationships. How are they going to develop? What we are going to need and possibly need more of as we become more digitally reliant.
Well, great. But in order for me to really be fair and honest, give you a real answer, I need to be clear. What do you mean by hyperdigitalism, ultra-digitalism? What do you mean by that? And what do you mean by hyperhuman? Like, what do those words mean to you?
So for me, as we become more reliant in the workplace on digital fixes and software, and rather than us as humans being able to do the work or doing the work as we would ordinarily do, we click a button or we put it into ChatGPT and we give it the instruction and it throws it out for us. So I think there will be a far less human involvement in a lot of the work that we produce because it'll be produced by the commands that we're giving our AI. And I think that's where I'm really thinking about what ultra digitalism means. Now, for me, hyperhumanism, what I'm seeing is that as we move towards things that are more technological, that actually as human beings, we need to hold on even tighter towards this humanism. And that actually as the world becomes more digital in one direction, we're going to need to be more human in the other direction, almost like balancing the seesaw. And that actually it's about retaining our humanity. We need purpose. We need to live to our values. We want to be engaged in our organizations. If we are moving towards an increasingly digital working world, we're going to have to move towards humanism to maintain that balance of what we need as human beings, that social interaction, that relationship. So that's what I mean by ultra-digitalism, hyperhumanism.
Yeah, thank you, Nia. I think I agree with you in the sense of the shift that is happening. I think, so the question is, what's the place of us humans where we can add real value?
Yeah.
Because with AI coming in, where we see that it's way more effective and much faster for the most, and we know just the level of learning that these AI platforms and large language models are happening. I mean, they are learning much faster than we learn. However, when one node learns, the whole system learns at once. So you just imagine, if it would be like if one baby learns Japanese, a Japanese word, but we're all connected in the same way the AI is, then every baby learns that Japanese word in that moment. So therefore, it all becomes one. It's all one organism that's learning at the same pace, at the same information. And there's no misunderstanding. It's all one piece. But we humans are designed differently. We learn at different rates. We see things differently. And it's in that which creates conflict because we understand things differently. We give different meanings to different words. We have different feelings about different thoughts. We are different. But that's our unique place, I believe, is in the difference. And that's what I mean by the magic. The opportunities exist because we learn at different rates, because we see things differently. And if we can harness that, then we can create really beautiful problems to solve. And what I'm really saying is we can create really beautiful questions to ask, and then we solve them. And those solutions are beautiful things because we learn differently, we see things differently, and if we create the space to really engage with one another, we can ask really beautiful questions. But if we are an AI that's all learning at the same time, I don't think the questions that it asks of itself is that interesting. And therefore, the solutions it comes up with will not be that beautiful, will not be that interesting. And by interesting, I think, yeah. So that's a good question. What does interesting mean? What does beautiful mean? But that's another Pandora's box. But in the space, in the future, where all the cognitive functions are being done by AI, and you're going to need less and less humans. The question is, what is the space for humans? And our space is in, when you say become more human, what does that mean? Hyperhuman. What does it mean when you say we have to become more human? That's a great question. For me, it's returning to the patterns of nature. That's what it means to me. And the patterns of nature, what is fundamental humans is our connection and relationship with one another. So how do we cultivate more connection with one another? How do we, and sometimes because we're all different, learning at different rates, we have more conflict because we have different perspectives, different definitions to the same words, misunderstandings. But if we could sit in that and we can explore that, we can find the magic. We can find the opportunities that wouldn't exist there that are not so obvious. It's like the flipping of the coin. What was once a challenge becomes the opportunity. So how do you cultivate that? That to me is the way of the opportunity for us so that we just doesn't become so monotonous. Everything becomes the same.
One of the definitions of my layers of self-awareness, or my model of self-aware leadership, is reflection of your hard skills and reflection of your relational skills. It almost feels like the hard skills, part of those will be handed over to AI, but we can never hand over the relational skills because that is unique to humans.
Yeah, but the soft skills can be emulated too, right? I mean, the AIs can talk to each other. There's AI therapy tools now. I mean, people are connecting with therapy tools and getting a sense of emotional connection to an AI tool. So it can be emulated. I feel like the relational skills can be emulated, right?
How do we deal with that? Does that then take away the humanity because it's emulated and it's algorithmic as opposed to humanistic? Is that our big challenge?
Great question. Well, let me ask you this. Are you more or less human if you see the stars or not at night? Really?
You are as human whether you see the stars or not.
Okay. So you're having as human experience. That's why I think the question is like, what does it really mean now in the future of us to be human? To what connection, what distinguishes us from all the digital machines that are being built?
And I suppose I'm answering that on the basis that some people can see and some people can't see.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That's maybe that's my
contextualization of our question.
No, that's wonderful. Maybe that's a great point. That's a great point. Maybe I should not be asking about seeing the stars, but I'm trying to give an example of when I was living in New York, and you would look up, living there for 18 years, and you look up at the stars and you see two stars. versus when you're living in a place where you look up and you see thousands of stars. Your place in the universe and your being shifts because you don't have a sense of the cosmos when you don't see stars, or your sense of watching. But you're right. I mean, this is not, and I can't speak to if you have the visually challenged, then obviously that's different. And I can't speak to that because fortunately I can see. But what I'm saying is that for a human, if you're watching the sunset or you don't watch the sunset, I do think that changes you physiologically. I think that does give you a sense of the ending of a day and the beginning of night, that day will never come back. I think that there's practices to remind us of what is human, and even the word human, what is that? To me, it's relational. It's like we are in relationship with one another, but we're also in relationship with earth and nature. And how connected are we to that? And that's what I mean by the patterns of nature. I think that can really be incredibly useful to us ask. But ultimately, why? What is this guy talking about? Is what's the questions we're asking ourselves? And, the AI is not really a question asker of itself. It's an executor of questions. It's an answer finder. Yeah. So what questions are you asking it? It's a new tool. It's an incredibly potent tool that's in our hands. What question are we asking of that tool?
Yes. Fascinating conversation, philosophical debate, a little bit of existential thinking going on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Topaz, for joining me. That was really, really interesting. Before you go, tell me, how can our listeners and our watchers get hold of your questions?
So theskindeep.com. We sell throughout England and the UK, throughout UK and Canada, Mexico, all of Europe, the US. So theskindeep.com, and the book 12 Questions for Love is available in ebook, audiobook, and hardcover on Amazon and anywhere you get your ebooks, or audiobooks. So that's basically how you can find us. And the social media channels are The Skin Deep. The Skin Deep.
We'll make sure that there are links in the show notes so that if anybody does want to get in touch with you and buy a set of your questions, I'm going to be one of them, they certainly can do. Topaz, thank you for joining me. It's been really interesting.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode, where we aim to develop self-aware leaders around the globe to generate kinder, more respectful and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition and regulation. Head over to my website at knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk to sign up to my newsletter to keep up to date with my blog, podcast and book. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.